Foreign Affairs, 9th of December 2022, Why India Can Beat China But Can't Replace It. No nation appears to be more positioned to gain as China's position as the workshop of the world is tarnished by increased political risks, a slowing economy, and unrealistic zero-COVID policies than India. The Economist's cover story on India in May posed the question, "Is this India's moment?" and concluded that it most likely was. India should not try to become China because the damage China has caused to the world will take 5 new universes to repair. Sadly, there is only one world. In more recent times, Nobel Prize-winning economist Michael Spence of Stanford stated that India was the standout performer currently and that it remains the most favored investment destination. Additionally, Chetan Ahya, the head economist for Asia at Morgan Stanley, forecasts that over the next 10 years, the Indian economy will account for 1/5 of world growth. Without question, if India can boost private investment, especially by luring numerous multinational companies away from China, it could be on the verge of a historic boom. Will New Delhi, however, be able to seize this chance? There is no obvious solution. We gave a low appraisal of India's events in foreign affairs back in 2021. We argued that prevailing notions of a growing economy were false. In reality, the nation's economic growth had slowed after the global financial crisis of 2008 and had completely stopped by 2018. We also claimed that India's insistence on independence and the flaws in its policy-making process, which we referred to as software bugs, were to blame for the slowdown. The collapse of China and the development of India are not inevitable, and there is no direct causal relationship between the two. Despite the enthusiastic publicity, a year later, the economic climate in India is virtually unaltered. Because of this, we still think that drastic policy changes are required before India can attract significant numbers of multinational corporations to shift their production there, let alone revitalize local investment. This is a crucial lesson for policymakers. Land promised, but not for India's benefit. India appears to be a promised land for multinational corporations in specific ways. Its competitors may have substantial disadvantages, but it has structural advantages, and the government provides significant investment incentives. Begin with the structural benefits. India is one of the few countries large enough to house many large-scale industries, producing initially for global markets and ultimately for the expanding domestic demand. Its territory is 9 times larger than Germany's, and its population is quickly approaching China's to become the largest in the world. It is also a well-established democracy with a rich legal history and an incredibly youthful, talented, and English-speaking workforce. India also has some impressive accomplishments to its name. Its digital infrastructure, particularly its financial payments system, has, in some respects, eclipsed that of the United States, and its physical infrastructure has improved significantly in recent years. There is also the issue of alternatives in addition to these benefits. Where else could multinational businesses go if they choose not to visit India? Other South Asian nations may have been viable candidates a few years ago. However, that has altered. Sri Lanka has gone through a historical, social, political, and economic crisis during the past year. An environmental catastrophe that devastated Pakistan has worsened its precarious macroeconomic fragility and political instability. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine drove up commodity prices and depleted the nation's foreign exchange reserves, even Bangladesh, a longtime development darling, was obliged to borrow money from the IMF. India stands out as a haven of stability amid the South Asian polycrisis, as the economic historian Adam Tooze has dubbed it. The comparison with China, India's leading economic rival, is much more striking. Chinese President Xi Jinping's administration has faced numerous difficulties over the past year, including sluggish economic development and an impending demographic collapse. Things have only worsened due to the COVID-19 lockdowns and assault on the private sector by the Chinese Communist Party. Beijing has had to deal with a restless populace recently, including the biggest anti-government demonstrations the nation has seen in years. As a result of the nation's shift toward authoritarianism at home and aggression abroad, as well as the poor leadership that has tarnished the storied China model, democratic India now appears to be even more appealing. Finally, India has taken actions that should theoretically improve the situation for foreign businesses. Early in 2021, the government unveiled its production-linked incentives program to offer financial incentives to domestic and international manufacturers who make in India. Since then, there have been a few notable triumphs for the PLI plan, which provides substantial subsidies to manufacturers in high-tech industries like telecom, electronics, and medical devices. For instance, Apple declared in September 2022 that it would create 5 to 10% of the new iPhone 14 models in India. In November, Foxconn proclaimed that it would collaborate with a local partner to erect a $20 billion semiconductor plant there. But if India is the promised land, many more examples should be added to this list. While domestic companies increase their investments to take advantage of the boom, international companies should be lined up to move their production to the subcontinent. However, there are few indications that one of these things is happening. By many standards, the economy still has trouble getting back on track after the outbreak. The GDP of India. As fervent observers never tire of pointing out, it is true that growth over the previous 2 years has been extraordinarily rapid, higher than any other significant country. However, most of this is a statistical illusion. What is omitted is that, among all major developing nations, India experienced the most crucial output reduction during the first year of the pandemic. GDP today is only 7.6% larger than it was in 2019, compared to 13.1% in China's fictitious figures and 4.6% in the slowly expanding United States. India has only had 2.5% annual growth over the past 3 years, significantly below the 7% annual rate that the nation deems to be its economic potential. The industrial sector's performance has gotten even worse. But things are about to change. Additionally, positive signs for the future are there. After a brief post-pandemic recovery, the number of project announcements, as tracked by the Centre for the Monitoring of the Indian Economy, has once more declined. It is still well below the peak seen during the boom in the early years of this century. The fact that there is evidence of multinational companies moving their production to India is much more striking. Despite all the rhetoric about India being the preferred investment location, total foreign direct investment has been flat for the past 10 years, hovering at roughly 2% of GDP. Many more businesses, including Google, Walmart, Vodafone, and General Motors, have had negative experiences in India for everyone that has seized the chance. Even Amazon has suffered. In late November, it announced that it was closing 3 of its Indian businesses in industries as diverse as food delivery, education, and wholesale e-commerce because of competition and a lack of understanding of the Indian market. Why are multinational corporations hesitant to move their operations from China to India? Due to China's ability to lower costs by massively subsidizing, even using slave labor, the country's sunk costs are the same reasons domestic businesses are hesitant to invest there. 2 of the many risks associated with investing in India are crucial. First, businesses still lack the assurance that the rules in place at the time of their investments won't be altered later in a way that makes them unprofitable. Additionally, even if the regulatory structure appears appealing on paper, businesses cannot be sure that the laws will be upheld relatively and not in favor of the government's chosen national champions, the enormous Indian conglomerates. These issues have already had detrimental effects. Changing policies have severely harmed the earnings of telecom companies. Energy companies have had trouble collecting promised payments from the state electricity boards and passing cost hikes on to customers. After making significant investments by the original laws, e-commerce companies have learned that government judgments about proper techniques can be altered. This has impacted Chinese corporations primarily involved in espionage activities. National champions, meantime, have greatly profited. As of August 2022, the Adani Group, whose founder has unexpectedly risen to the third richest person in the world, was responsible for about 80% of the $160 billion year-to-date gain in the value of India's stock market. In other words, the odds are stacked in favor of the person with the most significant money. They are dealing with national champions is perilous because these organizations are also vying for supremacy in the same profitable industries, like e-commerce. Additionally, other domestic companies are unwilling to enter markets controlled by organizations significantly benefiting from government regulatory favoritism. Neither may international businesses partner with significant domestic businesses to lower their risks. Entry into the Indian market is expensive. Other factors besides increased dangers may cause international businesses to continue to be wary of India. For instance, one of the main components of the PLI program is increasing tariffs on foreign-made component imports to promote domestic production. The goal is to persuade businesses moving to India to buy inputs on the domestic market. However, this strategy severely inhibits most multinational corporations because most parts are still manufactured in China, and many advanced items come from the most competitive producers worldwide. By imposing high tariffs on critical components, New Delhi has effectively dissuaded Chinese and assembly-based companies from considering investments in the nation. High import taxes might not be as much of a problem for businesses like Apple that intend to sell their products in India. However, these companies are few and far between since the middle-class consumer market in India is still startlingly small, only $500 billion, as opposed to the $30 trillion worldwide market, according to a study by Soumitra Chatterjee and one of us, Subramanian. International criteria place only 15% of the population in the middle class. In contrast, the wealthy, who make up a significant portion of the GDP, tend to save a sizable amount of their income. Both causes lower consumption among the middle class. The hazards of conducting business in India typically outweigh the possible benefits. New Delhi recently negotiated free trade agreements with Australia and the United Arab Emirates to recognize the developing conflict between its protectionist policies and its objective of enhancing India's global competitiveness. However, these measures pale compared to India's Asian rivals because of their smaller and less dynamic economies. For instance, since 2010, Vietnam has inked 10 free trade agreements, including those with China, the European Union, the United Kingdom, and its ASEAN allies, ASEAN. A warning of deficits. Key macroeconomic indicators must be reasonably balanced in any nation for the economy to take off, including low inflation and fiscal and external trade imbalances. However, these indicators are out of sync in India right now. Since well before the pandemic, inflation had exceeded the central bank's constitutionally required 6% cap. In the third quarter of 2022, India's current account deficit increased to roughly 4% of GDP due to the country's struggles to boost exports while imports continue to rise. Although macroeconomic issues exist in many nations, India's average of these three indices is worse than any other major country outside the US, China, and Turkey. Most concerningly, India has one of the world's most significant overall government deficits, at about 10% of GDP, behind China, with interest payments alone making up more than 20% of the budget. In contrast, only 8% of the US budget is allocated to debt payments, the predicament of India's state-run energy distribution corporations, whose losses currently amount to around 1.5% of GDP in addition to the fiscal deficits, worsens the situation. A significant structural change that has damaged the competitiveness and dynamism of private enterprises is the final obstacle to progress. The vast informal sector in India has been a brutal hit. First, the demonetization of large denomination notes in 2016 dealt a fatal blow to smaller businesses that kept their working capital in cash. Second, a new goods and services tax was implemented the following year. And third, the COVID-19 pandemic. Low-skilled worker employment has decreased dramatically as a result, and real rural wages have also fallen, which has forced India's poor and low-income populace to reduce consumption. These labor market weaknesses serve as a sobering reminder that the nation's lauded technology sector, whose potential might appear virtually limitless, only employs a small percentage of highly qualified individuals. Therefore, it seems improbable that India's growth as a digital powerhouse, no matter how successful, can produce enough advantages for the entire economy to bring about the broader structural reform that the nation requires. The opinion of India for general growth. To become the next China, India must overcome three fundamental challenges: high investment risks, a firm policy of inwardness, and significant macroeconomic imbalances. Since there are few other options available to multinational corporations, these barriers must be removed before they invest. They can relocate their activities back to ASEAN, which previously served as the global manufacturing floor until China took over. They can bring them back to developed nations that fit in that capacity before ASEAN members. Or they can gradually depart from China, taking the dangers because the Indian alternative is preferable. The optimistic predictions of pundits may come true because the Indian government is willing to reverse course and remove barriers to growth and investment. India's economy will continue to sputter along, with some sectors performing well, but the nation needs to realize its full potential. Indian authorities might be persuaded that China's decline foretells India's startling revival. But in the end, it is not just a matter of geopolitics or global economic factors as to whether or not India becomes the next China. It will call for a significant change in New Delhi's policy.